Imagine you're strolling through your local natural history museum. You've just gawked at A.T. Rex skeleton and are rounding a corner when suddenly, there's a dinosaur with a big old sail on its back. You might think you're looking at a sailback dino from the genus Spinopelta markmicheli. That's what the museum folks thought too, until 2021, when a study claimed that this particular fossilized beast was actually a type of Spinosaurus. But which one, Spinosaurus, honestly? We don't even know how many species of this weird dino there were, because they race so darn hard to tell apart. And that has led to some pretty heated debates in the scientific community. If you've been keeping up with our Dino Debate series, you already know that paleontologists often disagree about classification and naming dinosaurs. Sometimes their disagreement is over whether a new dino should be classified as its own species, or if it is better off under an existing but similar-looking one. Other times the debate is over what to call them in the first place. There's even sometimes disagreement over whether something is actually a dinosaur. And it turns out that all of these problems apply to our fishy friend here. In other words, just like the Loch Ness Monster, there are multiple sea monsters. So let us take a look at why scientists are struggling to nail down exactly what this creature is, and what it means for understanding ancient ecosystems. Spinosaurus aegyptiacus was a large carnivore that lived in North Africa during the Cretaceous period, which lasted from about 145 to 66 million years ago. It had a long and narrow skull, and most of its teeth were kind of blade-like, perfect for catching and slicing up fish. Basically, this dino was built for life in or near water, and fossils have turned up in places like Morocco and Egypt, which were both close to each other and covered in water when the dino was alive. But this is where the mystery begins. Over the years, several other similar-looking fossils have been found, and scientists haven't been able to agree on whether they should be considered a separate species or not. Like we said, they're very hard to tell apart. They're basically all just super long-snouted, long-tailed reptiles with spines running down their backs. So far we've identified 3 different kinds of Spinosaurus, though there may be more. The first is Spinosaurus s. aegyptiacus. This species was named in 1915, and it is the best known of the bunch thanks to the largest collection of fossils. We also have Spinosaurus moroccanus, which was described in 1971 and is distinguished by the shape of its vertebrae and ribs. Then there's Spinosaurus gazelle, a species named in 1991 that's got longer forelimbs than the others. And in 2021, a team of researchers proposed that yet another specimen should be classified as a 4th species, Spinosaurus micheli. Now this individual fossil isn't anything particularly special. It was discovered in Morocco in 1972 and has been sitting in a French museum ever since. It was studied a few times over the years, but no one really gave it much attention because it seemed pretty similar to the other 3 species. But in 2021, paleontologists decided to take a closer look at the specimen, which is nicknamed the Bataille bone collector. This Spino had been given the species name markmicheli because it was collected by a guy named Mark Mitchell. While he was working for the American Museum of Natural History, he was a real-life Indiana Jones type who went around collecting specimens in the early 20th century. In his honor, the researchers gave the dino the species name Micheli. But this new classification caused quite the stink because it made for species of Spinosaurus instead of 3. For context, other genera of ancient whales are broken up into about 40 species. And considering how closely related all of these guys are, that seems like a lot. So last year, another group of scientists took a look at all the available evidence and concluded that there is actually only 2 species of Spinosaurus. According to them, S. markmicheli should just be grouped in with S. aegyptiacus, and S. gazelle should be grouped in with S. micheli. And earlier this year, a 3rd group of scientists came along and said that none of the above classifications are correct. Instead, they argue that there are only 3 species of Spinosaurus and that the specimen known as S. micheli is actually a juvenile of S. aegyptiacus. So that would mean that the specimen that inspired the whole debate doesn't even deserve to be a species on its own. What is driving this debate is the fact that these fossils are so incomplete. that nobody can agree on what features are important for defining a species and which ones aren't. In order to distinguish between the different species, researchers have looked at stuff like the length and curvature of the tail and neck, the relative lengths of the front and back legs, and the shapes of the vertebrae and rib cage. But because the fossil record is so spotty, those features just aren't present in every case. For instance, we know that the back of the Spinosaurus's skull was narrow, but we don't know exactly how narrow. This is because a lot of the back of the skull is missing from most of the fossils, and that leaves room for interpretation if you're trying to figure out which species something belongs to. And two of the species have narrow skull back ends, but one has a narrower skull back end than the others. Then you do need to find an example of a narrow skull back end in order to make a definitive classification. But if all you've got to work with are partial skulls, that could be pretty tough to pull off. When it comes to the tail bone collector, some researchers say its ribcage suggests that it should be classified as its own species, while others say that those ribs are just immature. They could belong to an adult, too. Another point of contention is that this particular dino's pelvis looks more like the pelvis of a different kind of Spinosaurus. But again, some people say that it's just a juvenile pelvis, and that's that. Other people say that the problem here is that everyone's studying these fossils using different methods. Some researchers are looking at morphology, or the size and shape of bones and skeletons. Others are looking at things like bone structure and composition, and still others are looking at things like growth marks and development. Basically, this debate comes down to semantics because no matter which of these groups you ask, they will tell you that all of the species of Spinosaurus are very closely related and look pretty much the same. So the major disagreement is over what level of difference is necessary to create a new species. So, which group is right? Well, at the end of the day, we can't say for sure. Each study has its strengths and each of them brings up good points. Until we find more complete fossils, it'll be hard to draw clear conclusions. Plus, there is always the possibility that more fossils will turn up in the future and shake things up. Even more. Maybe there are 5 species of Spinosaurus or maybe 7. At this point, it's impossible to say. So what does this all mean for poor old Spinosaurus? Honestly, probably not much. As we said, all of the species are super similar. So whether there's 1, 3 or 10 species of Spinosaurus, that's not going to change much. What is important is that people keep studying these fossils and searching for new ones. We need more data in order to make the best possible classifications. And if any of you happen to find a well-preserved spine sailback, please let us know.